Situation and suddenly you completely forget something you know perfectly well. I mean, you literally know you know it. It's hovering right there on the edge of your brain, but you just can't grasp it. And then, the exact second you finally throw your hands up and give up, boom, it just magically appears. Today, we are taking this incredibly strange but universal phenomenon apart, piece by piece.
So, why does your brain suddenly refuse to cooperate right when you need it the most? It honestly feels like your mind is playing a cruel trick on you, deliberately hiding information just out of reach. But here's the thing, this isn't random, and it definitely isn't just bad luck. There's actually some incredibly complex, unseen machinery operating inside your head that causes this.
Picture this. You're sitting in an exam room. The clock is ticking down. You need a specific name, a word, an answer. It's right there, you can almost taste it, but nothing. So you surrender. You move on to the next question. And then, like 30 seconds later, completely out of nowhere, the answer just pops into your head. It arrives looking exactly like it was just sitting there the whole time, literally waiting for you to stop looking for it.
Section 1. Tip of the tome. Let's say you're trying to remember an actor's name mid-conversation. You know this person. You can picture their face, list their movies. Maybe you even know it starts with a J, but the name itself just utterly refuses to materialize. So you say forget it and go back to your coffee. And then there it is. The name arrives completely uninvited, usually about 5 minutes too late to actually say out loud. Or, hey, think about a song stuck in your head. It's never the whole song, is it? It's just this tiny fragment looping over and over. But the exact moment you finally stop humming it, it resolves itself, quietly right there in the background.
Scientists actually have this very specific, almost poetic name for this daily glitch, the tip of the tongue phenomenon. It's defined as a specific experience where a memory is totally inaccessible, despite having this incredibly strong feeling that you know it. And what's wild is that scientists have been actively studying this since the 1960s. We're talking decades of research dedicated solely to figuring out why we forget the very things we know.
Section 2. The paradox of trying harder. Okay, here is the ultimate contradiction. It's not just that you eventually remember the thing later on. It's that trying harder almost always makes it worse. The very act of straining, searching, actively forcing your brain to spit out the memory, well, that actually blocks the memory from surfacing. It's like your brain is actively jamming its own signal. By desperately forcing the answer, you're pretty much guaranteeing it won't arrive. Section 3. Inside your memory network. To understand the why behind all this, we really have to rethink how memory works. See, for a long time, the popular myth was that the brain stored memories like a neat, organized filing cabinet, right? Pull a folder open on command, and there's your fact. But the reality is far weirder than that. Memory isn't a filing cabinet at all. It's a sprawling, chaotic neural network. And this network is absolutely massive. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of individual neurons, all dynamically linked together, forming these incredibly complex pathways inside your brain. So when you try to remember something, you absolutely aren't just opening a file. Instead, you're kind of doing 3 things. Step 1, you trigger a massive chain reaction. Step 2, you're essentially crossing your fingers and hoping the right pathway lights up before a wrong one does. And step 3, you have to actively avoid those wrong pathways. And man, that right there is exactly where the trouble starts. When you desperately strain to remember, your brain goes into overdrive. Because of all that mental straining, it accidentally activates a nearby memory instead of the one you actually want. A similar sounding word, a similar face, maybe a similar feeling lights up in that neural pathway instead of your actual target. Section 4. What is retrieval inhibition? So this brings us to retrieval inhibition. This happens when that wrong memory gets activated first, and because it's so closely related to the right one, it becomes totally dominant. It physically blocks the correct answer from surfacing. Think of it like you've brought up the wrong data, and now that wrong data is literally standing in the doorway, blocking the right info from getting through. And honestly, this is exactly why giving up works. The moment you stop straining, that incorrect memory fades away, clearing the pathway for the right answer to naturally bubble up to the surface. Imagine trying to find a really specific book in a giant library, but every single time you reach for it, a nearly identical book keeps getting pulled off the shelf first, over and over again, no matter how many times you try to shove it aside. That exhausting, frustrating repetition, that is retrieval inhibition. Your brain is aggressively handing you the wrong book purely because you are trying so hard to find the right one. So next time you go totally blank on an exam or forget a name mid-sentence, just don't force it. Take a step back, let those wrong pathways dim down, and just let your incredible memory network do its job quietly in the background. But, it really makes you wonder. Considering how easily a simple word gets blocked by our own mental effort, what right in the middle of a sentence, totally engaged in a conversation, and suddenly a word just completely vanishes from your mind? You know it. It's right there, hovering, trapped just out of reach, but you absolutely cannot say it. Ugh, it is a universal, maddening frustration. Today, we're going to unpack the incredible science behind why that happens, and more importantly, why your own brain is basically tricking you.
Think about it like this. Imagine trying to find a specific, highly important book in a massive library. You know exactly what the cover looks like. But every single time you reach for it, you pull the exact same wrong, nearly identical book off the shelf first. Over and over again. No matter how many times you shove that incorrect book aside, you just keep grabbing it. It's like a glitch in your system. So why does our brain do this to us?
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the blocking hypothesis. Psychologists call this the blocking hypothesis, and it explains why forcing yourself to remember can trap you in a mental loop, chasing the wrong answer again and again. Believe it or not, your own effort is actually what is keeping you stuck.
Which brings us to Section 2, your subconscious background search.
Now, here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. The exact moment you stop consciously trying, that block doesn't just disappear, something else happens. Your brain doesn't actually stop working on the problem. It just stops working on it out loud, so to speak. The search continues, quietly, underneath your awareness. This is actually one of the most well-documented facts in cognitive psychology. A huge amount of your brain's processing happens completely outside conscious awareness. You're not aware of it happening. You feel like you've moved on. But underneath, in the background, neural pathways are still firing, still searching, still trying to make the connection. And without the interference of that wrong, nearly correct memory blocking the path, the right pathway finally has room to activate. That's the moment it hits you. Not because you tried harder, but because you finally got out of your own way.
Section 3, the 1966 Harvard Experiment.
Back in 1966, two Harvard psychologists, Roger Brown and David McNeil, ran one of the most famous experiments in memory research to study exactly this invisible process. They read participants' dictionary definitions of obscure words and asked them to name the word. Sometimes people knew it instantly, but sometimes they got stuck. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens next. In that stuck state, something remarkable happened. People could describe the word's first letter, how many syllables it had, even other words that sounded similar, all without actually knowing the word itself. Section 4, the tip of the tongue state. Brown and McNeil called this the tip of the tongue state, coining the official name for a phenomenon we all experience constantly. This proved that you can be partially remembering something. Your brain has already found pieces of the answer, the shape of it, the sound of it, without letting you see the whole thing. And their research proved something huge, a massive paradigm shift in how we view the brain. Memory isn't a simple on-off switch. It's a spectrum.
Section 5, developing the mental photograph.
To really visualize this, it's like watching someone slowly develop a photograph. The outline is there. The shading is starting to form, but the full image hasn't clicked into focus just yet. And the exact moment you look away from the photo, stop staring, stop straining, is often exactly when your eyes finally adjust and the image suddenly makes sense. This single study from over half a century ago kicked off decades of research into our deepest memory paths. And it leaves us with this provocative thought. Why is trying not to dive into the quirky and honestly sometimes maddening mechanics of human memory? We spend a massive amount of our lives trying to deliberately remember things. We're studying, making lists, repeating names over and over. And we spend just as much time complaining about how easily we forget things, right? But there is a totally different, incredibly strange force at play in our minds, and it has absolutely nothing to do with forgetting at all. It's this wild phenomenon where our brains stubbornly hang on to the unfinished, the random, the unresolved, while casually tossing away major completed milestones. Why is it that you can remember a random unfinished chore from yesterday, but entirely forget the details of a massive project you successfully finished last week? Well, the answer to that is wild, so let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever had a word or maybe a name just stuck right on the tip of your tongue? Think about how that actually feels in the moment. You're talking to a friend, you're trying to name that one actor from that one movie. You can clearly picture their face, you know exactly what other movies they've been in, you might even know the first letter of their name. I mean, the word is right there. It feels almost physical, doesn't it? Like a literal block in your throat. It's that universally frustrating feeling of a blocked memory. You know the word. You know the word, but you just can't bring it across the finish line into your conscious mind. We usually just brush this off as a random glitch in our brain, a tiny misfire. But it turns out that specific, nagging irritation isn't a glitch at all. It's tied to a very specific, powerful psychological phenomenon. And the story of how we discovered it is just as captivating as the feeling itself.
Section 1. The Vienna Cafe Mystery. 1920s waiters with superhuman memory.
To really understand why you get things stuck on the tip of your tongue, we need to talk about a brilliant Russian psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik. Back in the 1920s, Zeigarnik was spending time sitting in a bustling cafe in Vienna. And like any good psychologist, she was keenly observing the human behavior around her. As she watched the waiters navigating this loud, chaotic, crowded cafe, she noticed a bizarre contrast in how they managed their tables. While a patron's order was active and unpaid, these waiters demonstrated flawless, seemingly superhuman recall. They knew exactly who ordered the black coffee, who asked for extra cream, which table was waiting on a specific pastry. They kept this immense web of highly complex details perfectly organized in their heads without writing a single thing down. But the fascinating part was what happened next. The very second that a bill was paid and settled, that entire complex order vanished from their memory almost instantly. If someone asked the waiter a few minutes later what a specific table had ordered, they drew a complete blank. It was as if their brain hit a hard delete button the precise moment that information was no longer needed to close the transaction.
Section 2. The Interrupted Experiment. Taking the mystery to the lab.
Now, Zeigarnik was naturally curious, and as a dedicated scientist, she couldn't just leave this as a fun little anecdote from a coffee shop. She needed to know the actual mechanics operating in those waiters' minds. Why on earth did the brain hold on so tightly to the unpaid order, but completely dump the paid one? To find out, she brought this entire concept out of the cafe and into a controlled laboratory setting. Her methodology was elegantly simple yet deeply revealing. First, she gathered a group of human subjects and gave them a series of distinct, simple tasks to complete. We're talking about really basic assignments. Actually, scratch that. More like busy work. Things like stringing wooden beads onto a thread, putting together simple jigsaw puzzles, or solving basic arithmetic problems. Simple enough, right? But then came the crucial twist. She deliberately interrupted half of those subjects right in the middle of what they were doing, before they actually had the chance to finish the task. Imagine you're halfway through stringing a complex pattern of beads, you're hyper-focused, and suddenly someone steps in, pulls it away, and says, "Stop, you're done with that, move on." It's incredibly jarring. It creates a sudden spike of frustration. By doing this, she was forcefully creating that exact same tension of an unpaid bill, an unfinished task, right there in the minds of her test subjects.
And the results brilliantly illustrate the astonishing outcome of that experiment. When comparing the two groups, the ones who got to finish and the ones who were interrupted, the data revealed something incredibly stark. People remembered the unfinished, interrupted tasks nearly twice as well as the ones they were allowed to cleanly complete. I mean, think about the implications of that for a second. The interruption didn't disrupt their memory or cause them to lose focus. It actually supercharged their recall. The finished puzzles and completed math problems were quickly discarded by the brain, processed as done and dusted, just like the paid cafe bills. But the interrupted tasks, they lingered loudly. The brain fiercely held onto them, keeping all those details vivid and easily accessible.
Section 3. The Zeigarnik Effect. The Science of Mental Tension.
That staggering data didn't just validate Zeigarnik's cafe observations, it birthed an entirely new concept in psychological science. It formally gave a name to this incredibly common yet previously unexplained human experience. The Zeigarnik effect is formally defined as the brain's tendency to hold on to unfinished business with a kind of mental tension, refusing to let it go until it is resolved. I really want to emphasize those two words right there: mental tension. Your brain actively dislikes unresolved tasks. From a cognitive perspective, when something is left unfinished, your mind actually creates a sort of cognitive static. It initiates a holding pattern that keeps that specific information front and center, actively blocking it from being filed away into long-term storage or deleted entirely. It does this because it's anticipating that you still need that information to finish the job. It's essentially a built-in survival mechanism. like a mental alarm clock designed to keep you alert to what still needs doing.
Section 4. The unpaid mental bill. Why your brain won't let go.
So now it's time to shift the focus from the 1920s waiters and laboratory puzzles back to you, right now, in your everyday life. We want to connect this foundational psychological discovery directly to how your own mind operates when you're just going about your day. It really boils down to this incredibly powerful realization. A forgotten memory is simply an open loop. Let's go back to that modern example of desperately trying to recall the name of an actor in a movie you just watched. When you just can't get the name, it's incredibly easy to view that as a failure of your memory. You feel like your brain is breaking down or betraying you, right? But the Zeigarnik effect teaches us something entirely different. That blocked memory isn't a deletion. It's not a malfunction. It's actually an unfinished task. It's an open loop that your brain is stubbornly refusing to close, maintaining that cognitive static until you finally figure it out.
So the crucial point is beautifully captured by the research itself, which describes it like this. That nagging, itchy feeling is your brain's version of an unpaid bill, sitting open, demanding resolution. That perfectly ties everything together, doesn't it? That tip of the tongue frustration you feel isn't just random irritation. It is the exact same mental tension experienced by those waiters in the Vienna Cafe all those years ago. Your brain is treating that missing word, that forgotten actor's name, exactly like an unpaid coffee order. It's an active, unresolved file sitting right in the middle of your mental desktop. And your brain is going to keep nagging you, keeping that cognitive static buzzing in the background until you finally remember the word, finish the task, and settle the bill. Only then will the tension finally release. Which leaves us with this final, somewhat provocative question to ponder today. What unpaid bills is your brain refusing to let go of right now? What open loops are creating mental tension in your day-to-day life? It might be an unsent email, an unresolved argument, or just a trivial piece of missing information you couldn't quite remember this morning. Understanding the Zeigarnik effect doesn't just explain why we occasionally forget things, it reveals how deeply, almost desperately, our brains crave closure. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this deep dive helped illuminate.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive straight into the fascinating neuroscience of why your absolute best ideas so often happen when you just stop trying to find them. It's a phenomenon pretty much every single one of us has experienced at some point, right? You're stuck on a problem at work, you're agonizing over a creative project, or maybe you're literally just trying to remember the name of that actor from that one movie. You grind, you focus, you finally give up in total frustration, step into the shower, and suddenly, boom, the perfect answer just pops into your head. Why is it that when you're staring at a blank screen, your brain gives you absolutely nothing, but the second you pick up the shampoo bottle, you're suddenly a genius? Society constantly tells us that hard, relentless focus is the only way to solve complex problems. But today, we're going to look at the science that proves why taking a step back might actually be the absolute smartest thing you can do for your brain.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the benzene ring daydream. You might have heard this historical mystery before. The chemist August Kekulé famously claimed the structure of the benzene ring came to him in a half-asleep daydream, after months of consciously failing to solve it. Back in the 19th century, understanding the chemical structure of benzene was a massive scientific roadblock. Kekulé had spent months working tirelessly, grinding through different possibilities, and just completely failing to make a breakthrough. But after all of that extreme conscious effort, the answer finally surfaced when he just surrendered to the exhaustion. He dozed off by a fire and envisioned a snake playfully dancing before suddenly biting its own tail. That weird visual perfectly unlocked the circular structure of the benzene ring. It was a completely accidental moment of brilliance. Now, whether that story is fully accurate or slightly embellished over time, the underlying pattern it describes is very real, and it's been replicated again and again in laboratory conditions. Science shows us this isn't just folklore. This exact sequence of events, intense conscious failure, followed by accidental brilliance when the mind finally disengages, is a totally repeatable neurological process. Modern researchers have given subjects incredibly difficult puzzles, and the folks who are forced to just keep grinding away continuously, they rarely find the solution. But the subjects who are told to take a break and let their minds wander frequently come back and immediately see the answer. So, to understand why, we need to look at what your brain is actually doing when you think you're doing nothing at all. When you finally step away from your desk, close your laptop, and just let your mind drift aimlessly, what's actually happening under the hood? Which brings us to Section 2, the myth of the quiet brain. For decades, scientists assumed the brain went quiet during idle moments. They basically thought the brain powered down into a low-energy standby mode, kind of like a computer monitor going to sleep to save power. But brain scans prove the opposite.
This network lights up, wiring together distant regions in unexpected ways. When researchers finally put daydreaming people into MRI machines, they were shocked. The brain wasn't powering down at all. It was burning massive amounts of energy and buzzing with wild, synchronized activity. Because stepping away doesn't mean your brain stops working. It means your brain switches from a narrow, effortful search to a broader, associative one. You aren't turning off the engine, you're just shifting gears. And that broader search mode is where forgotten memories and unexpected solutions tend to surface from. It is the exact cognitive environment you need to find the missing puzzle pieces that your highly focused mind simply cannot see.
Let's dig into the exact mechanics of that in Section 3, the default mode network.
In the early 2000s, neuroscientists discovered something that reshaped how we understand the resting brain, a network now called the default mode network. It's a set of brain regions that becomes more active, not less, when you're not focused on a specific external task, when you're daydreaming, showering, or staring out a window. It's totally ironic, right? Default implies doing absolutely nothing, but whenever you stop writing that demanding email, this powerful network quietly boots up and actually takes the wheel. This is the part of your brain responsible for mind-wandering, imagination, and, critically, pulling together loosely related pieces of memory that your focused, goal-driven mind would normally keep separate. Imagine your brain is a massive corporate office. During the day, everyone is in their own cubicle, not talking to each other. That's your focused mind. But when the default mode network kicks in, it's like an office mixer. Suddenly, accounting is chatting with creative, and they are hosting a massive, free-flowing brainstorming session in the background of your consciousness.
Okay, moving on to our final part, Section 4, flashlight versus floodlight.
Think about it like this. When you're actively trying to recall something, you're using a completely different network, a focused, task-driven system that narrows your attention deliberately. You literally squeeze your eyes shut and tense up trying to block out distractions. But the default mode network is built specifically to embrace those distractions. It thrives on loose, unpredictable searching.
That narrow focus is great for many things, like doing your taxes, but it's terrible at loose associative searching, which is exactly what's needed to find a memory that's hiding just out of direct reach. That agonizing tip of the tongue feeling happens because trying harder only narrows your focus further. Squeezing your brain tighter just locks the door even firmer.
But here is the real game changer. The moment you stop trying and your mind wanders, you switch networks entirely. The second you give up, sigh, and walk away to make a cup of coffee, the struggling, highly focused system powers down. You hand the problem over from a system that's failing to a system beautifully designed to solve it. Your brain goes from a flashlight beam to a wide, glowing floodlight. When you're intensely focused, it's like standing in a pitch-black room with a tiny flashlight. If the answer isn't exactly where you point it, you'll never find it. But when the default mode network takes over, you drop the flashlight and turn on the floodlight. You illuminate the entire space at once, revealing all those unexpected connections sitting right there in the dark.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty wild thought to ponder. What unexpected solutions could surface if you finally gave your brain permission to stop trying so hard? What if you actively made time to just do nothing at all? Stepping away isn't a sign of weakness. It's literally a vital neurological part of the creative process. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep letting those minds wander, and I'll catch you next time.
You know that incredibly frustrating feeling when a word is just literally right on the tip of your tongue? You know exactly what it is, you can practically taste it, but it's completely out of reach. We strain, we focus harder, and absolutely nothing. But then, right, 10 minutes later, you're washing the dishes or taking a shower, and boom, pop, there it is. Why does that happen? Well, it turns out that when we step back in that wider light, connections that were completely invisible under our narrow beam of focus suddenly become visible. And that includes the exact memory you were desperately chasing just minutes earlier.
So why exactly do we remember things only after we stop trying? I mean, we've all asked ourselves this after finally remembering a coworker's name at like 2 in the morning. But here's the cool part. This isn't just theory. Researchers have run actual experiments specifically designed to trigger and measure this exact effect in real time. They wanted to see precisely what the brain is doing when it suddenly just hands you the answer you'd already given up on. To figure out how our brains retrieve this missing information, scientists look closely at what we call a stuck memory loop. In one really well-known study, participants were given these tip-of-the-tongue words to search for. They were basically inducing that exact mental block on purpose. Then, they split the participants into 2 groups to see how different mental strategies would actually affect their recall.
And the crucial point here is comparing the two different approaches they took. Some folks were told to keep trying, keep straining, force the memory out. But the others, they were given a distracting, completely unrelated task instead. Now, standard logic would probably tell us that the group working harder and focusing longer on the problem would be the ones to solve it, right?
Well, standard logic is totally wrong here. The group that got distracted resolved significantly more of their stuck memories than the group that kept straining to remember. Let me repeat that. The distracted group won out. By completely abandoning the active search, their brains were somehow able to retrieve the blocked information so much more effectively. This science really shows us a totally different paradigm for how memory works. That distraction wasn't wasted time at all. In fact, it was the exact mechanism that let the correct memory pathway finally activate, completely free from interference. See, when you intensely focus, you're essentially creating cognitive noise. You're repeatedly firing the wrong adjacent neural pathways. Stepping away and getting distracted kind of quiets all that noise down, leaving the pathway clear so the correct answer can just slide right into place.
And honestly, this goes way beyond just mental tasks. Other studies have shown that simply changing your physical environment, like walking into a different room or stepping outside, can trigger the exact same effect, suddenly jogging loose a memory that felt completely stuck just moments before. Now, you might have heard this called the doorway effect in a related context, but the underlying idea is exactly the same. A shift in context physically resets your brain's search process. It's almost as if your brain needs to be tricked into letting go before it will actually hand you what you were looking for all along. Now, this isn't just limited to remembering random trivia or people's names or catchy song lyrics. This exact mechanism plays a massive role in some of history's most famous creative and scientific breakthroughs. It's really the core engine behind some absolute paradigm-shifting moments of genius.
Just take the classic story of Archimedes. He's stepping into a bathtub, right? And suddenly he grasps the principle of water displacement, famously shouting Eureka and running through the streets. The thing is, he wasn't sitting at a desk forcing the answer. He was relaxed. He was completely distracted by something entirely unrelated, taking a bath. And that's precisely when the insight arrived.
And we see this happen in the arts too. Paul McCartney has actually said that the melody for the song Yesterday came to him in a dream, totally fully formed, after weeks of unconsciously working on it in the background without even realizing it. The ultimate distraction, sleep, cleared the interference completely and allowed this absolute masterpiece to just appear.
So that brings us to the final thought for this explainer. What breakthrough is waiting for you to finally let go? Seriously, the next time you feel completely stuck on a complex problem at work, or even just a stubborn memory of a song lyric, remember that taking a step away is a highly effective, scientifically backed tool. Go for a walk, do the dishes, switch up your physical context. Try to trick your brain into letting go and ask yourself, what brilliant answers might your mind happily hand over if you just stop trying to force them?
Of how our brains actually solve problems, recall information, and make decisions. We all walk around with this deeply held assumption that we're the absolute masters of our own minds, right? Like we're the captain at the wheel driving every single thought. But, well, the science actually tells a very different and honestly deeply fascinating story. Let's just dive right in. Think about this for a second. How much of your thinking is actually happening completely without your permission and without your awareness at all? It's kind of an unsettling question, isn't it? We really love to believe that every brilliant idea we have, every memory we pull up, is the direct result of our own conscious effort. But what if your conscious mind is actually taking credit for a massive amount of work it didn't even do? To figure out just how much of this is happening entirely off-screen, we really need to look at a phenomenon that pretty much all of us have experienced. Which brings us to Section 1, the anatomy of an epiphany. We've absolutely all been there. You're staring at a problem, totally stuck. You finally just give up in frustration, step away to maybe take a shower or walk the dog, and then, bam, the answer just pops into your head out of nowhere. Well, these aren't just charming anecdotes. They match a well-documented psychological pattern researchers call the Eureka effect, sudden insight following a period of mental rest. So cognitive scientists wanted to know what is physically happening inside your head the exact moment before that aha happens. What's truly fascinating here is the timing. Brain imaging studies have even captured this moment happening in real time. A distinct burst of activity in the right temporal lobe, right before a person consciously realizes they've solved something. Yeah, you heard that right. The neural fireworks literally go off before you even know you have the answer. That burst of activity happens before the person is even aware of it. Your brain solves the problem, and then,
almost as an afterthought, informs you. It does all the heavy lifting in the background, connects all those elusive dots, finds the solution, and only then does it clue your conscious mind in. You are, quite literally, the last to know about your own brilliant idea. This brings us to a major paradigm shift in Section 2. Is your consciousness a control room or a news anchor? We really need to look at who's actually pulling the strings up there.
Which raises that unsettling but fascinating question from earlier. How much of your thinking is actually happening without your permission and without your awareness at all? Well, the honest answer, based on decades of cognitive science, is a lot more than most people are comfortable admitting. We're just so incredibly attached to the feeling of being in control. Finding out how much of our cognitive processing is automated and hidden, well, it almost feels offensive to our egos, right? But the science is just so clear on this.
Your conscious mind likes to believe it's in charge, carefully searching, carefully deciding, carefully remembering. It absolutely loves taking the credit. But underneath that very convincing illusion, an enormous amount of processing happens completely off-screen. It's happening in the dark, without any of your active input whatsoever. This is the core of the illusion. We tend to think our consciousness is the control room of the brain, pulling levers, pushing buttons. But the reality, consciousness, in many ways, behaves less like the control room of your brain and more like a news anchor, reporting decisions and discoveries that were already made moments earlier elsewhere. Your conscious mind is basically just sitting at the desk, reading off a teleprompter. You're the broadcaster, not the producer.
Okay, so how do we use this? Let's get into Section 3, hacking your own memory. So knowing all of this, the blocking effect, the Zeigarnik effect, incubation, the default mode network, can you actually use it? Can you hack your own memory? When you're completely stuck on a problem, or you're trying to recall a word that's right on the tip of your tongue, can you leverage this whole inner news anchor setup? Surprisingly, yes. And once you understand the mechanism, the fix is almost embarrassingly simple. You really don't need some complex cognitive training regimen or anything. You just have to stop fighting your brain's natural workflow and actually start cooperating with your unconscious mind. We can break this down into 2 highly effective, concrete techniques you can deploy the very moment you feel stuck. Step 1, stop retrieving and start describing. Step 2, deliberately switch tasks. Now, I know these might sound a bit counterintuitive, especially the idea of stopping trying to remember when you literally want to remember something. But let's look at exactly why this works so flawlessly. Okay, so the first technique, the moment you feel a memory is blocked, stop retrieving and start describing instead. We all know that agonizing tip of the tongue feeling, right? Your instinct is to try harder, to force it, but doing that actually traps you on the wrong answer. So instead, say out loud what you do remember, the letter, the feeling, the category. This keeps the search loop open, feeding your unconscious mind clues without forcing the narrow blocking search that traps you on the wrong answer. You're basically tossing loose clues over your shoulder and letting your unconscious mind dig through the archives. If that doesn't trigger the Eureka effect, move to the second technique. Deliberately switch tasks. Not passively give up. Actively shift your attention to something moderately engaging but not too demanding. Think doing the dishes, taking a shower, or going for a quick walk. This mild level of distraction occupies your conscious mind, our friend the news anchor, just enough so it stops interfering. Meanwhile, your unconscious mind takes all those clues you just fed it and goes to work in the background, incubating the problem until it can finally hand the answer right back up to the news desk. It really changes how you look at your own thought process, doesn't it? Next time you have a sudden flash of brilliant insight, maybe take a quick second to thank the tireless, unconscious machinery running behind the scenes. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on today. Were your decisions today actually carefully chosen by you? Or were they just reported to you by your inner news anchor? Keep that in mind next time you get stuck. Stop forcing it, distract the anchor, and just let your brain do what it does best. Thanks for hanging out for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one. Have you ever found yourself completely stuck on a problem? You know, you're staring at a screen or trying to recall a piece of information that is literally right there on the tip of your tongue, but your brain just absolutely refuses to cooperate? Well, we usually think the solution is to just push harder, right? To just grind it out. But in this explainer, we're going to map out a totally different approach. We're talking about the counterintuitive architecture of strategic letting go. We'll explore the exact cognitive strategies you need to get your brain unstuck. And we're going to start with what you should absolutely avoid doing when taking a mental break. So when you hit a wall, you must avoid switching to something too absorbing. I'm talking about things like a fast-paced video game or a really gripping true crime show. I know it's so tempting. You get frustrated, so you fire up a high-intensity distraction to blow off some steam, or maybe you just do a little doom scrolling on your phone. But that's actually a trap. See, your brain is essentially this powerful processing engine. Even when you consciously step away from a problem, a background search is still running, trying to connect the dots. If you suddenly flood your system with intense stimulation, well, that pulls away essential cognitive resources and actually slows down your brain's background search for the answer.
Now, if you've managed to avoid those intense distractions, you can leverage the third technique, and this is possibly the most powerful one of all. Sleep on it, quite literally. If a memory or a problem isn't super urgent, just give it a full night's rest before returning to it. We so often treat sleep as a luxury, or maybe as a sign of just giving up for the day. But cognitively speaking, it's an incredibly active and strategic process. If you're wrestling with something and you really don't need the answer at this exact second, the absolute most productive choice you can make is to step completely away and go to sleep.
Studies actually consistently show that a night of sleep dramatically increases both your memory recall and your creative problem solving. It heavily outperforms the instinct to stay awake, grab that third cup of coffee, and just grind away at the issue. The traditional approach is to force it until you crack it. But the data tells us the exact opposite. That grinding approach is fundamentally flawed compared to the restorative, problem-solving power of rest. Your brain does all the heavy lifting of connecting those associative pathways while you're asleep, which gives you a massive advantage the next morning. But okay, what if you just can't sleep on it? Well, the fourth technique is to change your environment. If you're stuck at a desk, the absolute worst thing you can do is just stay there. Get up, walk to another room, or better yet, go outside for just a few minutes. And this isn't just about getting some fresh air. It's a mechanical, structural context shift. When you're blocked, your neural pattern is essentially stuck in a repetitive loop. It's like you're running into the exact same dead end over and over again. By changing your physical environment, you physically interrupt that stuck neural loop, and that gives your brain permission to abandon the failed search route and start looking using entirely different, fresh, associative pathways. And that brings us to a fifth, almost paradoxical technique: consciously telling yourself it's okay to forget. I know it sounds a little strange, but you literally have to lower the emotional stakes of not remembering. When you put pressure on yourself to solve a problem, or you feel anxiety about being stuck, you actually intensify this really narrow, focused search mode in your brain. And ironically, that exact mode is what causes the mental blocking in the first place. So the solution is simply reducing that pressure. The moment you consciously accept forgetting, the pressure drops. That immediately widens your mental search radius and lets your brain finally access the information it was locking away. Put all of this together, and these 5 techniques really aren't about trying harder. They're about deliberately, strategically trying less, in exactly the right way. Everything we're exploring in this explainer points to a massive paradigm shift. We are totally conditioned to believe that effort always equals friction, right? That you have to push and strain and force a result. But avoiding absorbing distractions, sleeping on it, changing your environment, and lowering those emotional stakes, all of this proves that strategic letting go is actually an incredibly active form of effort. You aren't giving up, you're just trying less to optimize how your mind naturally works. Now, the really crucial point here is that this concept extends far beyond just memory and trivia. That core idea that letting go is sometimes the most effective form of effort, well, it shows up as a necessary strategy in creativity, in decision-making, and even in grief and emotional processing. It's honestly a fundamental mechanism of human psychology. Whether you're trying to generate a highly creative idea, trying to navigate a complex life choice, or working through profound emotional pain, the exact same rules apply. The harder you force the process, the more you narrow your brain's ability to find any real resolution.
Actually, many therapists note this exact phenomenon. They observe that profound insight into difficult feelings rarely happens during active, aggressive analysis. When people are trying to work through tough emotions, our natural instinct is to actively pick them apart. But breakthroughs usually don't arrive when you're directly forcing them. Instead, true insight arrives during quiet, unstructured moments. It happens when you finally step back, when the pressure is off, and when your brain is finally allowed to search wider pathways without all that anxiety of forced resolution. And this pattern is the exact same one psychologist Zeigarnik discovered in a Vienna cafe nearly a century ago. She noticed that waiters could remember incredibly complex, completely unpaid orders perfectly, but the very moment the bill was settled, the memory just vanished completely. The mind holds really tightly onto what is unfinished, just like those waiters remembering unpaid bills.
and releases it only once it finds resolution. But forcing that completion often guarantees you just stay stuck. So I'll leave you with this. What unfinished business is your mind aggressively holding on to today? And how quickly could you find your resolution if you simply allowed yourself to walk away?
Know the feeling, right? We've absolutely all been there. You're in the middle of a great conversation, you're right about to make your brilliant point, and suddenly, a word or maybe a person's name is just stuck right on the tip of your tongue. It's a universal and honestly maddening frustration. You can practically feel the shape of the word. You know the exact letter it starts with, but it's just hovering slightly out of reach. Today, we're going to explore exactly why this happens and what it reveals about the hidden architecture of our minds.
So why do we forget names right when we need them? It's the central mystery of this everyday annoyance. Why does it feel like our brains just randomly decide to betray us at the exact moment it matters most? You're standing there, snapping your fingers, trying to force the memory up to the surface, and literally nothing happens. It feels like a complete system failure.
But here's a totally counterintuitive truth for you. Your brain isn't malfunctioning when this happens. It's actually working exactly as designed, running a slower, quieter, more thorough search than your impatient conscious mind ever could. What feels like a breakdown is actually a sign of brilliant design.
Think of your mind as having two entirely different search engines. On one side, you've got your impatient, conscious mind. This is the part of you demanding the answer right this very second, trying to force that memory up to the surface. But on the flip side, we have the thorough, unconscious mind. The second you get stuck, your brain actually kicks off this slower, quieter background search. It's methodical, and it's happening completely beneath your awareness.
So the crucial point here is this. The frustration you feel in that stuck moment isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that your brain has already started solving the problem, just not on your schedule. It requires a level of patience that our conscious minds usually just don't want to give.
And you know, there's actually a formal psychological framework for this relentless background search. It's called the Zeigarnik effect. Essentially, the Zeigarnik effect is the mind's natural tendency to hold on to whatever is unfinished. When a task or trying to recall a memory is left incomplete, your mind flat out refuses to let it go. It keeps that background process running, and it only releases that mental tension once it finally finds resolution.
This exact pattern was actually discovered nearly a century ago in a bustling Vienna cafe by a psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik. She was watching these waiters remember incredibly complex orders without writing a single thing down, only to completely forget them the very moment the bill was paid. She realized that the mind simply will not abandon an open loop. So when you can't remember that name, you've essentially opened a loop, and your brain is refusing to close it until the answer is found.
When we hit one of these mental blocks, our instinctive reaction is usually to just stay at our desk, kind of panic and try even harder to force it. But the source material shows us that this is completely counterproductive. The highly effective approach is what we call strategic letting go. So the next time a name, a word, an answer slips away right when you need it, try not to fight it.
So, how do we actually practice this strategic letting go? Well, the research points to 4 really powerful techniques. First, you want to avoid overly absorbing tasks like intense video games because they pull resources away from that background search. Second, a night of sleep does absolute wonders and dramatically increases recall. Third, simply change your environment. Get up, walk to another room, just do something to interrupt that stuck neural pattern. And finally, consciously accept the forgetting. Literally tell yourself it's perfectly okay that you can't remember it right now.
That final technique is absolutely vital. And here's why. Anxiety and pressure actually intensify the narrow, focused search mode in your brain. It's the exact mode that caused the blocking in the first place. By lowering the emotional stakes and telling yourself it really doesn't matter if you remember, you immediately widen your mental search radius. You're giving your unconscious mind the space it desperately needs to explore different associative pathways.
Put together, these techniques aren't about trying harder. They're about deliberately trying less. Say what you do know. Change the scene. Let your mind wander somewhere else entirely. And trust that somewhere, quietly, underneath your awareness, the search is still running, patiently working toward an answer that will, almost certainly, arrive the moment you stop demanding it.
Because it almost certainly won't happen while you're just staring at your screen. It might come while you're brushing your teeth.
It might come in the shower. It might come right as you're falling asleep tonight. But it will come, not because you tried harder, but because, for once, you finally let go.
And you know, this idea extends way beyond just trying to remember some random piece of trivia. This exact same principle unlocks creative problem solving and really complex decision making. It even applies to processing difficult emotions and working through grief. Therapists often point out that profound insight into difficult feelings rarely arrives during active, stressful analysis. It usually arrives during quiet, unstructured moments when we just surrender the need for immediate control.
And maybe that's the strangest, most human thing about memory. The harder you chase it, the further it runs. The moment you stop, it comes home on its own.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Maybe that's the deeper lesson hiding inside a simple, everyday annoyance like a forgotten name. Not everything responds to force. Some things only unlock when you stop pushing on the door. So I'll leave you with this. What else in your life might unlock if you stop pushing so hard and just let the background process do its work?
Like the video. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.